My name is Jeffrey Skibins. I am an associate professor at East Carolina University. My specialty is conservation psychology.
Hello, I'm John Rossi. I'm a touring drummer with a passion for animal conservation. When I'm on the road, I spend as much time as possible visiting zoos, aquariums, and conservation organizations. Now, I want to share those places with you. I'll be talking to keepers, vets, conservationists, anyone who can help me in my mission of connecting my people to animals through their people. Join me on my Rossifari. Hi, hello, how are you? Welcome to an episode of the Rossifari podcast that has been 5.5 years in the making. That's right, y'all. So as you heard in his introduction, I am speaking to Jeffrey Skibins at East Carolina University. He's a professor, and that's not normally what we go for on this podcast, is it? No, it's not. You know it, I know it, we all know it. However, it's not what you're thinking, because my guess is you're sitting here going, oh, John, of course it makes sense. He probably teaches some like zoo teacher course. I went off the rails quickly. No, but like, you know, a zookeeping course or something like that, right? Nope. So Jeffrey focuses on conservation psychology and applying those concepts to zoos and aquariums. So if you've been with the podcast since the beginning, you know that very early on, I shared that I wanted to talk to someone specifically about why people go to zoos when they seem to not like zoos. Now, I'm obviously not talking about most of the guests that go, but we've all been to the zoo and heard someone walking around talking about how all the animals look unhappy or how, you know, zoos shouldn't exist or something weird like that. And it's a weird thing to be at a place that you spent money to go to and have this attitude. And so I remember, since this was one of my first ideas ever for an episode, was that I wanted to talk to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or something who could explain to me that idea. And obviously, as we've gone through the years, we've had people on who have their own opinions and thoughts. But it is one of the questions that I bring up to Jeffrey, and other ones that come up in this episode include things like, is it better to see an animal on safari in the wild or at a zoo when it comes to like conservation actions? A really surprising story about messaging around palm oil. What makes an animal charismatic, as we use it in the conservation science field, like that word, charismatic? Strategies to take the steam away from the anti-zoo crowd. Do guests actually care about natural-looking enrichment, or do they not care? A fascinating discussion about the word captivity and so much more. And, you know, if you listen to this podcast, you know that I almost never start this section by talking to you about what we talk about. But let's face it, y'all, that's a hook, right? This is a very different episode, and it's an episode I've wanted to make for a long, long time. And along with all of that, Jeffrey has recently been named the co-leader of the Safe Tree Kangaroo Awareness and Engagement Working Group, which I'm a part of. So I'm really proud of him for taking on that leadership role and really excited to work with him on all of this stuff. So yeah, we don't even talk about that in this episode, though. It's all just philosophical chatting about what his studies have shown and his own opinion on the things that I mentioned a moment ago. So we're going to get to that really quickly. Before we do, please hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. Follow along at Rossifari on the socials, at Rossifari Pod on the TikTok machine. And if you'd like to support us, you can do so for as little as $3 a month by going to patreon.com/Rossifari. So with all of that said, let's get to this wildly interesting interview, shall we?
My specialty is conservation psychology and applying those frameworks and paradigms to understanding how, for this particular context, zoo visitors, aquarium visitors, wildlife sanctuary folks relate to the wildlife they see and how we can get them more engaged in conservation behaviors.
Yes, and that is something that we are both very passionate about. You in a very educated way, and me in a I'm a drummer, but hopefully I can help kind of way. So
That's exactly what we want, though. We want
right?
everybody out there beating their own drum, metaphorically and literally.
So let's start off by telling people how we met.
Okay, so the usual way, I guess, in 2025, completely virtually. And have you heard of this guy? No, check him out. And did that. And then the next thing you know, we're in a meeting together and chit-chatting away. And we end up with kind of a sideline text conversation going on. It's like, hey, you're doing really cool stuff, John. I want to talk to you more. And then, I've got some ideas to get you into some of my classes. And next thing you know, here we are.
Yeah, so, and it's funny. So first of all, that was for the Safe Tree Kangaroo program.
Sorry.
We know, but there are other people listening. It was interesting too, because not only are you interested in what I'm doing and does it kind of apply to what you're talking about with your classes, but also one of the very first ideas I had for this podcast, and something that I did not even know how to pursue, was to talk to somebody who is into the psychology of all of this stuff, of conservation, of zoos, of all that stuff, because there are so many things that I see happen that I just don't understand, and so many things that I just, every time I'm at a zoo, I see somebody do something and I'm like, what is going through their brain right now? And while I fully accept that sometimes the answer is nothing, it's nice to know that there's somebody out there doing the thing. And so I've been looking for you for 5.5 years, and now here we are.
That's right. Well, I'm glad you found me. I hope it's not as disappointing, because unfortunately, I think most of the time my answer is I don't know either what's going on. But I guess it's good job security, because then we can keep studying that and
you're like I don't know, but in a very educated way.
That's right. It depends on the variables and parameters under study.
So tell me how did you get into this field? What is your background?
Oh, what a convoluted or simple question with such a convoluted answer, I guess, as is usual. I've heard you said numerous times, like the path that you hear other zoo professionals mention is such a varied and circuitous one, and so I guess I won't disappoint in that sense. And maybe that's the norm for zoo people. It just takes not a while to find it, but just a while to finally get there. I grew up in Chicago, going to Brookfield Zoo, Lincoln Park Zoo, Field Museum. Like every year, that was the thing. What do you want to do for your birthday, for this, that, or the other thing? And it was, we're going here, we're going to one of those places or one of the forest preserves. So for me, zoos and museums were just kind of a normal way of life. Not something super special in terms of like you only get to go once in a while, but it was just, again, being in Chicago with the world-class institutions there, it just becomes almost second nature. You get to see these really cool, neat exhibits, these great animals and cutting edge display concepts and things like that. So it was always just something that was of interest to me. I ended up studying biology in college and thinking that I wanted to be a conservation biologist ultimately. So when I went from undergrad to graduate school and was the first cohort in that university to get a conservation biology degree. So that was the first time they offered a full 2-year master's program. So did that, and then wanted to come back to Chicago to work. And of course, the conservation biology going on in a major metropolitan city is a lot different than the trekking through a rainforest or peering through bamboo to see pandas or red pandas, as the case may be, which was kind of like the idea. And then, reality hits. So ended up working for a number of agencies in and around Chicagoland, and just never really feeling like it was still the right the final career path, right? It was good, but it was always kind of tangential to what I was feeling I wanted to do. And so ultimately I got connected with two of the leading guys in interpretation, Sam Hamm and Ted Cable. And they were explaining to me, oh, you can actually come back for a PhD in these fields of study, studying zoo visitors, studying zoos. You can be a zoologist, not a zoologist. And so I was like, get out of here, really? You could that's a thing? And and they're like, yeah. So ended up working with them and getting involved. And so going back after being out of school for about 15 years to go back for my PhD, and worked on essentially looking at wildlife tourism, both in the field, so African safaris, scuba diving on the Barrier Reef, Amazon River cruises, and zoos, aquariums, parks in the U.S. and looking at the comparisons and contrasts between those experiences. And so kind of ended up working my way through there, kind of always having a foot in that world. I guess maybe it's not quite as circuitous, but there were some interesting little cul-de-sacs and diversions along the way. That's for sure.
That's really cool. And so how established, I guess is a good word, is this field? Like, are there a lot of zoologists out there, as you put it?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think there are. It unfortunately is hidden probably in a lot of academic jargon where, as I said at the beginning, I study conservation psychology. Well, okay, what exactly is that? I study zoos, really. Oh, well, that makes, I get that, So I think if people get down to brass tacks, we'd see a lot of zoologists out there. So there's quite a bit, but it's interesting. The field really, to my opinion, got its start at the Brookfield Zoo with a very well-known and fantastic researcher, Carol Saunders, who's since passed away, but under the direction of George Rabb, who was the director at that time, he really gave her a lot of latitude to start exploring this concept of understanding how people relate to the natural world and how they do that through zoos, and how we care for and care about nature, animals, conservation, that sort of thing. And given her amazing academic abilities and intellect, she basically kind of created this field of conservation psychology and really fleshed it out in the late 90s, early 2000s. And there's some great papers out there that came out of that, but got established at the zoo, started in the zoo world, and I think was really in response to seeing what zoos need and how they can improve what visitors can do. It's not necessarily about not making the zoo better in the sense of saying, like, these are the things you could do better, but rather here's ways, with the millions of visitors zoos get just in the US alone, how can we move that needle by 0.5%? And you're still talking, hundreds of thousands of people doing something. That's a massive audience to reach. And this gives a mechanism to sort of set up some identified boundaries and ways to evaluate and assess your efficacy in that point.
Nice. Very cool. So talk to me about, just to give people who are listening an idea, just some of the studies that you've done or the things that you've looked into.
So started out looking at comparing going on an African safari to going to, among other places, the Brookfield Zoo. So if you see an elephant in Africa, if you see a herd of elephants across the Serengeti, or you see 5 or 6 elephants in Chicago, North Carolina, Washington, D.C., something like that, what are the effects that it has on the visitor? Where are they similar? Where are they different? And how can we capitalize on that? And so, interestingly, well, I'll put it to you. So here's the trivia question for the day. So seeing an elephant, a giraffe, a lion on an African safari, in one of those pop-up Jeeps where you've got your cameras and your binoculars and spotting scopes out and everybody's looking at this animal, or seeing it at the zoo, which do you think has a stronger effect on creating an emotional connection between the visitor and the animal they're looking at?
So my instinct would be to say a safari, because it's in in its habitat and everything.
Right.
But I would say that I have one caveat to that, which is I think you can build deeper relationships if you go and see the animals more times. So I would actually say that, like, going to the zoo, like I fell in love with red pandas because I got to know these red pandas,
Right. Okay, good. Okay. I realized, so I made a professorial mistake here. I didn't give you a correct answer slate. So is it safari, zoo, or no difference?
I would guess safari for one visit, but not by a lot. That would be my guess, though. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a fair enough answer, and it's a well-reasoned one. A for effort, but you get the X from the Family Feud there.
So as a zoo podcaster, I'm really glad to hear that, honestly.
Exactly. So turns out there's no difference, at least for my particular site. Now there's 1,000 caveats around that, but the key point that once that data came back in, and I was working with my committee chair, he's like, you do have a good pair of tap dancing shoes, right? Because this is going to be a very interesting sort of discussion, because the intent isn't to say we should no longer do safaris, nor is the intent to say we don't need zoos, right? That it was merely to say, where are the strengths and the differences so that we can capitalize, because one of my hypotheses was that there's a lot of overlap between people who go to zoos and people who go on safaris or go on these large scale wildlife tourism trips. There's oftentimes a tremendous overlap there. They're the same folks who are donating to zoos, members of zoos, and aquariums too. Again, we fall into that trap, but zoos and aquariums always is.
On this podcast, because we talk about them so much, it's a known thing that if I say zoos, I mean zoos and aquariums.
Okay, very good. Yeah,
they're just water
zoos. Very intentional about not leaving them out, because there's some tremendous work at aquariums as well. But what we did see was that really the effect was about the same, whether no matter where you see it. And I think there's a lot of the points that you brought out are exactly what sort of emerged as driving a lot of that is proximity to the animal, time spent with the animal, ability for a tremendously up close experience compared to seeing it in the wild doing what it's doing and having that experience as well. So, but I think one of the big take homes from that is that people are able to connect to wildlife in a number of settings. And that's a tremendous tool that we have to build upon and really enrich, to make everyday citizens' lives and tourist visitors' lives better, and connecting them to nature and linking them to wildlife can have profound effects long term, even though you may not be able to identify the knob going from 9 to 10 right now. Over time it has, and all these things contribute. So studies like that, we do a lot of work with assessing exhibits and displays for zoos. One of my grad students was from she worked at the Taronga Zoo in Sydney, Australia, and we did I say she did a fantastic study and evaluation of their Sumatran tiger exhibit, which was this massive undertaking the zoo did to create a virtual reality, all new multimedia display, just a fantastic opportunity for visitors to walk through and get up close with these tigers and really have a very modern, cutting edge sort of experience with interpretation, constantly evolving and growing with the exhibit. And so we were able to kind of assess what was driving people's pluses and minuses for that, what they were taking away, evaluating their kind of their knowledge gain and then their behaviors after the site, because it was really linked to the sustainable palm oil campaigns that are going on. So we do things like that. We look at and then the other big thing. Hold on. You cannot tickle me with a feather and then not tell me what did you guys find? Well, it was I was hoping we might skirt past that a little bit. So overall, the exhibit and everything is a complete home run, which is probably not a great analogy for an Australian zoo, but they had good runs in cricket, I guess. But the challenge they ran into is that for so long at a societal level within Australia, there's been such a movement against palm oil that trying to educate people about sustainable palm oil is a very big uphill battle. And so a lot of the zoo visitors really took to heart the message that palm oil is bad. It's hurting the rainforest environments. The agricultural techniques to create palm oil are really bad for so many animals. Let's stop using it. And that message has gotten out and it has been adopted very, very strongly. And so now trying to steer the Titanic towards sustainable palm oil is a very slow moving operation. And so that was the big challenge that emerged, is that a lot of the zoo visitors felt that they couldn't really, even though they trusted Taronga Zoo, they trusted the agencies that were promoting sustainable palm oil, they just couldn't feel totally secure that it really was a thing yet, if that makes sense, right? Where just still not buying the whole idea. That there's room for too much exploitation, I think. So it was the visitors loved the exhibit. They learned a tremendous amount, but the behavior part was still a little not where they were hoping for because of that messaging. So, but those are some good, I guess those are good challenges to have, right? Where people are actively doing things that they feel and have been told are good for conservation. So now just trying to modify some of that is some of the challenge that they're facing. So, but the other, I think one of the newer ones now is really right up your alley as well, and that kind of how we got together with tree kangaroos, and not to say that red pandas and tree kangaroos aren't charismatic. I mean, kind of by definition, they embody every single academic variable for being charismatic, but they're not megafauna, right? They're not big in terms of physically large. And so a lot of times zoo visitors tend to walk past them. They don't know what they are, or they're doing what they do, which is sleeping at the top of a branch a lot of times. And it's kind of furry and fluffy, but you're like, okay, we're moving on. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do now is use what we've learned about these principles of how people connect to animals to help the zoos develop specific and intentional campaigns to help visitors connect to lesser known or more endangered animals that may or may not be charismatic. They may or may not be megafauna, but they're definitely flagships and can be used to help drive conservation efforts. So that's a lot of what we're working on now.
Nice. Very cool. Now, I am curious. It's actually funny you brought that up because my wife, Zoe, and I were having a conversation yesterday about what charismatic means from a scientific standpoint. We know what the word means,
right?
And I was saying that red pandas are charismatic, and so are tree kangaroos. They're not megafauna, like you said.
Correct.
And she said, are they? Red pandas definitely are. They're very popular, very well-known species. And she goes, but are tree kangaroos? Because most people don't know what they are. And I was like, I don't really know what charismatic means in that sense, because to me, they are. And when I post videos or photos, a lot of people see them for the first time in their lives, but they fall in love and they're like, ooh, what is that? So how do you define charismatic?
That's a great question, and if you are interested in a career in graduate school, your questions are right up the alley. So we can, whatever degree you want, John, let me know. We'll hook you up with.
I have actually been looking into master's programs, so we should actually talk about that. But yes,
this can be your master's project right now. You can have it all fleshed out, and all you got to do is collect the data. So I think you hit the nail on the head, though, in terms of distinguishing charisma from popularity. Right. So usually popularity will be based on, it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. If you're popular, you probably have some levels of charisma. On the other hand, your levels of charisma will make you become popular. And so like the tree kangaroos, I think that's a very apt anecdote of people never heard of them. And once they do, they've subscribed to every social media feed. They start following them. They look for a zoo that has them to go see them because they can't get enough of them. That's charisma, right? And so they didn't know it, and then they instantly saw it and they fell in love. So there's a lot of ways to define charisma from sort of a scientific study, a school approach, where you look at various morphological features, you look at behavioral features, you can look at ecological features as well. And all of those will kind of come into play to help animals be charismatic. So, essentially, though, it's also in the eye of the beholder. So, what one person may find charismatic, another person may not, and that's why that's the challenge with getting, in particular, like insects and herps to become popular, is because they don't have a lot of the very commonly identified features that the bell curve of zoo visitors would say is charismatic or appealing to them. So there's been some really foundational work by an author named Jamie Lorimer, who's really done some great work in describing sort of the concepts of charisma, particularly from an animal perspective. And zoo animals, it fits in really well because it really starts to play into how do they relate to their environment, right? And so I think you would lose some charisma with a tree kangaroo if you just put it in a sterile concrete and glass enclosure with a fake tree and silk leaves, right? And had a water bowl there. But if you show it in its normal habitat and an arboreal sense, maybe have some elevated platforms to bring kind of people into the trees and demonstrating how the animal functions in its natural habitat, really helps to bring out that sort of cultural and ecological charisma as well. That's oftentimes what people subconsciously identify but can't always articulate.
That makes a lot of sense. That's really cool. Wow. There's a lot of depth to that, and it really does. It goes back to our, yeah. So what are there? Are there animals that you think are popular that you would call non-charismatic? Like they got popular somehow? Like I know I'm thinking of one. And this is just based on my experience, but rhinos. I think rhinos are really cool. But like if I post rhino photos, no one gives a crap.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, I don't know. That's one thought I have, but I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I think that's a great example, right? And that is also, if you think about it, they don't possess a lot of the features that are normally associated with charisma or popularity, kind of two sides of the same coin. They're big, right? And interestingly enough, being deadly or being a predator is often a feature that people look for, making it popular or charismatic. And they arguably they're not necessarily a predator, but they can be deadly, right? You don't want to get on the wrong side of a rhino, and you have to be careful when you're in the wild with them, obviously, and in the zoo setting, of course, too. Not to diminish that, animal husbandry for those critters is very interesting, but most of the time you think of basically just think of a teddy bear. Right. What's the feature of any, or look at any plush animal, stuffed animal in the gift shop? What do they have? Big forward facing faces, neonatal characteristics. In other words, they kind of look baby like. They look like when they're a little animal, or human infant features: big eyes, smaller ears, smaller nose, mouth, bigger face. And so those features are what people relate to. And so animals that tend to have that more and have relatable behaviors as well. So gorillas are a great example of this, right? There's tremendous ability to identify features that we feel are similar: hands, feet, behaviors, how they interact, what the perceived emotions of those animals are, all make them very relatable. Rhinos, they just kind of stand around. They don't do stuff. Now, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Woodland Park Zoo has the Save the Chubby Unicorn t-shirts. Yep. Yeah. So I mean, now that's a brilliant marketing campaign that that just cracks me up every time I see it. So that's a way to make them a little more relatable. But yeah, but again, that's where a lot of what my work does is help zoos or any agency really identify what some of those features are and how to get past them or lean into them, right? Like Save the Chubby. Now, I can't. I'm not taking credit for Save the Chubby Unicorn, but that's a way to lean into those features that make it very distinct and weird, so to speak, but could be lovable at the same time.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, okay, I have a question for you that has been bugging me. Like I said, this is the question. When we talked about this before, I told you this is the thing that made me want to seek out somebody who does what you do.
Okay.
Which is, I was
no
very
pressure here to get the answer.
No, none at all. But I was very specifically, I was at the Philadelphia Zoo.
Okay.
And the Philly Zoo is a great zoo. It is not a cheap zoo. Tickets are, I don't remember, like 60, $70 a person for an adult. Cheaper
Mhm.
for kids, but expensive, right? And there was a family of 5 there. A dad, a mom, and 3 kids. And they were eating lunch, and they all had a full meal in front of them. And again, the food at the Philly Zoo is not cheap. It's good
Mhm.
food, not cheap. So by my calculations, they had easily dropped $200 minimum for their day at the zoo.
Oh, right.
Minimum. And all this dad could do was talk about how sad all the animals looked and how depressing it was there. And by the way, it's the Philly Zoo. It's a great zoo. The animals that look sad are like gorillas that don't smile because they're gorillas and not humans. And so, like, I was having a great time. The animals looked fantastic. Everyone was in great shape, all the things. And I literally wanted to stop this man and be like, first of all, stop it. You're making your kids sad. They were like crying over it. But also, what makes you want to drop 2 bills to go and walk around and feel bad about animals? And I'm so curious if you've had any thoughts on that.
Uh, yeah, that's a good one. I think that could be Master's project number 2.
I mean, because I see it a lot. It was that
Yeah.
one that stuck in my mind, but like, there's a reason I use noise canceling headphones at zoos.
I think I'll try and take the optimistic or positive view of that, and saying that um, an individual like that, whether that individual or not, but someone in that circumstance who brought their family there, let's paint it in the best light possible, wanting to give them an opportunity to connect with nature at a big picture perspective in that sense. And because that individual has a strong level of empathy for wildlife, they feel that life in the wild for any animal will be infinitely better than life in captivity. And they're incorrectly projecting their own perceptions. This is where anthropomorphism goes bad. And I'm a huge fan of anthropomorphizing. So
Me too.
I'll just put that out there. I know that academically that puts me in the minority, but I think there's really good evidence for why we should do that, or how it can be done well, and does not diminish anybody's cognition. But that individual may be anthropomorphizing in a bad way, where they perceive, because the animal is sitting around doing nothing, they're bored or they're uncared for. And we have again, I think this might, again, if we try to look for the positive, is indicative of what a good job zoos have done of demonstrating that animals in their care are cared for beyond the quality of life they would get in the wild. They live longer, they reproduce better, they have better health metrics all throughout, because they're not trying to survive day to day, right? They're not dealing with the vagaries of nature. So because of that, they're able to sit around and live fat and happy, quite literally, to an extent, within reason. So but explaining that to that individual might go a long way. They Now, arguably, they might be somebody who's very against zoos and was dragged there against their will and is trying to demonstrate to their kids that they're bad. But if they weren't bad mouthing zoos as an institution, but rather just that these animals look sad, that would be an opportunity for the zoo world, kind of writ large, to really continue the education of zoo visitors about what life under the care of zoo professionals is for these animals, which is really outstanding. And I think, and that's where a lot of the empathy work is going on, and we see that coming out, right? Because I think that's part of the response, is that people see, here in North Carolina, people see the polar bear out in July when it's, like the fifth circle of purgatory, hot, And he's pacing back and forth. I say he, it might be a she, I can't remember, but the bear is pacing back and forth and looks hot and is in his air conditioned den most of the time. And a lot of people are very upset. And if you sat by that exhibit, you would hear people saying this is ridiculous. Why is it, why is this animal here? Or, this is so awful for the animal. So, but at the same point in time, nobody really is concerned about the elephants in Chicago in winter, or like growing up at least, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Brookfield is phasing out African elephants at least.
I believe that is correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but elephants in a northern climate, nobody's concerned about them in winter because they go inside, and nobody says, "Oh, how sad for the elephant. It has to stay inside all winter where it's warm." But everybody says, "Oh, this is terrible for the polar bear in summer because it's so hot." So again, it's sort of misplaced. And I think it still is demonstrative of a little bit of the work we have to do as a community to educate the visitors about life as a zoo animal.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's particularly challenging in my mind because interacting with so many anti-zoo people. Here, a word of advice: if you're ever going to go mega viral for something, don't have it involve an elephant. Oh, just saying. But
usually when I go mega viral, I'm taking some NyQuil, and that's the end of it.
That's fair.
My version of mega viral.
But yeah, no, I've had death threats, so it's fun. But the thing that makes it so hard for me is it all comes from the same place, which is a love of animals and nature and caring. And it's just a lack of education. And like with so many other things that I'm passionate about outside of the animal world, it's not that way. The people that I disagree with politically, like, want to hurt the people that I love, and the people that, I disagree with on whatever about, what the best TV show is. It's because we have different interests, whatever. Right. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to this, you start off with, "Oh my God, I really love animals," is like the first sentence on both parts.
Right.
And it's the education and the lack of it. And especially with so much, there's so much out there now, and it's unverified, and people can just say whatever. The amount of anti-zoo, posts that I see every week that just lie. They will even take an event that isn't a good look for a zoo, because things happen,
Sure.
even at the best zoos, and they will take an event and still lie about it and make it worse somehow. And I'm like, oh my God, if you can't stand for what you believe in by being truthful, then what the hell are you doing?
Well, that's the internet, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I mean that's kind of the we're victims of that. But I think that brings up a good point though, where I would encourage zoos and conservation agencies to really be aggressive in their social media campaigns, to be in front of this as much as possible all the time. We know what the issues are. Right. Where there's usually not a new issue emerging. It's, oh, you've got animals in the wrong environment. Animals are bored. They're uncared for. It's mean to have them in captivity. The list is pretty well defined in terms of the major. So if we could be more intentional as a community of constantly deflating those arguments and explaining what reality is in an ongoing way and flooding that market with those arguments, I think you really help to take away the steam then, because then people are saying, well, the zoo says this, the empirical data is supporting this. Why are you complaining about it? Right. And then it gets down to, I still think, and again, I would definitely, I'm a strong advocate for zoos and aquariums, but I think it still is a rich and robust debate to have. Should they exist in a broad philosophical sense, right? What is their role now in the 21st century universe that we live in on a global scale? How do zoos and aquariums function, and what should their function be if these animals are in captivity? And I think a lot of it is also just explaining that the AZA and WAZA or WAZA, if we want to be really culturally appropriate, so much of their focus is creating self-sustaining populations within the zoos. I mean, long gone are the days of Teddy Roosevelt going into Africa and bringing back specimens for museums and zoos, where, that's not the norm anymore. And so, I would bet, now again, I have no evidence for this, but I would bet, if I had to, that if you went up and down the street and interviewed the man on the street, so to speak, they would say that that's probably still happening. And that again, so basic level information that the zoo and aquarium world can be in front of on a daily basis, we're not collecting anymore in the field, right? Like, we're actually replenishing the field. We're putting back into nature, with these repatriation programs. So it's really something, again, it's just making sure the word's out there all the time.
Yeah, and I think it's particularly problematic because most zoos, I think, still do pull from the wild and stuff. Not good, like accredited zoos, obviously, right, is what we're talking about here. But like, I think one of the hardest things is that I'm anti-zoo for like a huge percentage of the zoos out there. Not the accredited ones, and there are good unaccredited ones too. I'm not just saying that, but that is kind of an easy way for me to know what I'm getting into when I approach a new facility. But I've had conversations with people at zoos who don't know what I do, and they're not talking to me as Rossifari. I'm just a guest, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we send people down twice a year to get these things from here," and I'm like, "Oh crap, okay." And that is why I have, even in my personal life, stopped going to unaccredited facilities unless they're recommended to me.
Right.
But I think it's hard to be like, well, yeah, no, zoos are great. Well, okay, not that one and not that one and not that one, but this one. And enough people don't know about accreditation,
Right. And again, there's another example of a talking point that could be routinely put out there that doesn't need really, what do I want to say? It's sort of advanced or cutting edge interpretation behind it. It's really just an educational point that needs to be made, and it can be made in a very simple but understandable way, but ongoing, repeated. Here's what's happening, and here's what accreditation means, and here's what it means to take an animal from the wild. Here are the animals that still may be taken from the wild, but again, these are very intentional collections that are meant to improve the genetic diversity. They may be temporary also, right, where the animal is put back, or is used to create breeding stock for a repopulation program. So there's a lot of things out there, and it brings up, I think, a good question though that zoos could be asking themselves too, is like, what is our role going forward for the next 100 years? And again, I just think to myself, of myself growing up in Chicago, it's a city of 3 million, 4 million people, depending. And the experience I had of seeing animals I would never have the chance to see in the wild, and caring about them and falling in love with conservation and wildlife around the world. Urban, as the country becomes more and more urbanized and more people go to zoos in these major metropolitan areas, this is a major impact and a way for people to connect with nature they might never see, but can see on a routine basis there. I think it's interesting if you put it in contrast. I'll ask my students this a lot too in our natural resources class. How many of you have been to a national park? And I'll have maybe 2 or 3 students raise their hands. And I'll say, how many of you have paid for national parks? And everybody keeps their hand down. It's like, well, no, you're all paying for it with tax dollars, right? So, if you're paying for it already and you're not taking advantage of it, why should we have them? On the other hand, if we're seeing all these animals in zoos, should we have more zoos, right? This is clear, so again, just trying to point out some of those differences of where the interest lies, what people are willing to pay for. Because if that same family that was at the Philadelphia Zoo, that like, as you said, I would venture to say, I'm sure they walked out of there with a few souvenirs and a few more $5 bottles of water. They're probably at $350 before they got out, and $20 to park, right? So, but would that same family have spent $350 to go to Shenandoah National Park? Probably not, right?
Right.
Very few families would spend $350 for a day in a national park. So again, there's a perceived value of zoos that go beyond that as well. That again is something to kind of really, I think, for us to think about at a very strategic and conservation level of how do we leverage that to improve, blending the in situ ex situ conservation that zoos do.
Definitely. One of the things that always amazes me, just when you talk about that, like, because obviously I think part of what the Philly Zoo family, experience is that they're probably from Philly
Mhm.
and they went in Philly because it's in Philly, right? It's
Right.
something you can just do. And I always find that so amazing. I'm sure you've seen this scene because it happens a million times, but like every movie or TV show that ever happens in New York at some point has the like drone shot of New York or, a sky shot of New York, and you see Central Park there in the middle and all of the buildings and all this stuff.
Right.
And every freaking time I see that shot, as I see Central Park, I think there are two red pandas right there. That's astonishing to me. You see all this building and this
Yeah.
concrete jungle, and there are just two red pandas right there. Not to mention the ones at Prospect Park and in the Bronx, but just right there in Central Park. And it's amazing that even in this massive teeming sea of humanity,
Yeah.
there are two red pandas where people can go and learn about them and fall in love with them. And I'll tell you, it's right by Broadway. So when I'm there doing auditions or when I'm in studios there, and it's like usually the most high pressure stuff I do in my career, you bet your butt as soon as I am on a break, I race my ass to that zoo and I just stand there with the red pandas and recover,
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
it's amazing that we can do that, because you're right. I can't get to Nepal over my lunch break. I just can't do it.
Yeah.
I've tried.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's part of it is is doing those connections and having exhibits that really sort of bring you in and create that environment for you. And I think we're seeing that too, where more and more zoos are moving towards these immersive exhibits, or at least so I'll use Animal Kingdom at Disney as an example. And again, I happen to think that Disney does a lot of things right. Obviously, there's challenges, but as far as a venue, as far as catering to the visitor, being in front of what the visitor wants and needs, and creating an experience, they create an experience. And Animal Kingdom does a great job of that, where you really feel you're in Africa, you really feel you're in Asia, and everything around you is all that, right? Even if you're not seeing a lot of animals at the time. And so exhibits that push people into that sort of immersion, where even the trails are lined with vegetation that mimics the look and feel of that sort of vegetation. There might be piped in sounds and things like that. The retail opportunities are all linked to that sort of general cultural viewpoint. I think that does a lot to help connect people that way and drive interest, right? And demonstrate to people how these things are playing out in other parts of the world, and give you a little bit of that experience. And I would venture to say I think most zoos would probably be able to show that the trips that they lead are to places like that mimic the exhibits that people are interested in wanting to go see, to go to Nepal and see the red panda in its natural habitat.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So you were talking about, kind of like how you like at certain places like at Disney, how they mimic the natural, environments that you would find these animals in and stuff. And that brings up another really interesting, controversial topic that I would like your take on right now. I just released an episode where I spoke to another brilliant doctor about this, Dr. Grace Fuller at the Detroit Zoo. And I'm curious your take. So, enrichment items. There is a big push in the zoo world right now that they should all be naturalistic. And I get the idea behind it. And it's mostly guest driven. It's mostly so that guests see them doing species appropriate behaviors. But I know my personal feeling is that in a world where they're not actually in the wild, and they're not, they're like you said, species, we're literally educating people on the fact that they're going to live longer and do better because we give them things that they wouldn't get in nature. Then who cares if they have a boomer ball that's not, whatever? Like, that's my take on it. But I'm curious what your take is on it, and if you've done any research into that or anything like that.
Yes, yeah. So that's a really good and growing question. I have some of my projects have included that question on surveys. So we have some data around it, but usually it was used more not as a standalone, but to help inform people's overall evaluation of the exhibit. That was one thing, the animal enrichment and those sorts of things. So um, in general, it's kind of the results that I'm seeing are pretty neutral. It's not really strongly for or against it. And the enrichment in general is always well received because it gets the animal active and moving and doing fun things to watch, like shining a flashlight or laser pointer for your cat or dog and watching them run around the house, right? It's entertaining to watch in that sense. And having the animals doing something, I think, is always a good thing, provided it's within the realm of reality and mimicking natural behavior. So that's if you can do those sorts of things to get people to see them, that's always good. You see, and I think kind of in line with this would be another question around the sort of the philosophical nature of it is, should we alter nocturnal animals' normal circadian rhythms to mimic nighttime during the day when everybody's at the zoo, as opposed to and a lot of visitors don't seem upset by that, by seeing bats active at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but there they are, right? Um so I think in general, I would say that, again, sort of anecdotally, the data I'm seeing, visitors are not overly concerned with the realistic nature or the mimicry of something that would happen in the wild with those animals. But that being said, I haven't seen people get overly excited about, oh, it was great to see the meerkats had like mud balls or something, that would be naturalistic. But what I do hear a lot of is where they'll throw like the empty kegs in the bear pools and that sort of thing. And people will be like, oh, wasn't quite sure why they had a keg in there. That's that sort of thing. Not that they were indicating that they thought the animal was being given alcohol.
Right.
But rather just, it's a beat up tin ball looking thing. So I think if you can, I would say my guess now is probably that as long as zoos can sort of use objects that might not be readily identifiable as man-made, that probably is not a big issue. But I think enrichment in general is well received by visitors. So things that we can do that align with the zoo's strategic objectives for education and visitor engagement would be satisfactory in my book.
Makes sense. And then I have one more big philosophical question for you.
Okay.
And I'm going to call you out a little bit, which is
Uh-oh.
always fun. So you've been using a curse word, a swear word on my podcast repeatedly.
Oh, no.
And it's the C word. And I don't mean that C word. You're not that naughty. I mean captivity.
Yes.
So there has been a big push in the last couple of years to move away from the word captivity. And it stems from a speech that was given by somebody in Australia, I believe, at their zookeeper conference or whatever it is. And you can tell how prepared I am for all of my podcasts. But anyway, but they gave the speech and they basically said that, when the general public thinks of the word captivity, like they think of a captive there against their will, which like you could argue that zoo animals are, because it's not like we give them a choice. It's not like they get to vote. So that is a fair word, but it's usually done more as like captive as in like negative and like treated poorly, and you think of like a prisoner is a captive and that kind of thing. Correct. So I'm just curious your take on that. And like I've personally stopped using the word most of the time, although sometimes it comes out, or sometimes it really does seem fitting. But if you've looked at any public perception of that, or even just your thoughts on whether we should be using that word or not.
Boy, that's a loaded question. I'm cognizant of I would loosely say the zoo world to moving away from that term. I guess part of it is because I'm not day to day in accredited institutions and dealing with the public and as well as management and donors and things like that, right? I have the luxury of being outside of that and sort of just coming in to help as I can, which may now be a little more limited in the future. But so I don't have to worry in that sense so much around that if when I'm discussing things, because my majority of my conversations take place with people that's not really an issue. So I'm not as aware of that. I understand what the concerns are and the subjective connotations of the word, and I understand how that can be in response. Zoos feeling that needs to be responded to and addressed. Again, my personal feelings on it are I understand the issues. I feel that education and interpretation provide a mechanism to explain what we do without needing to become word police and constantly checking our vocabulary for potential offenses somewhere or misunderstandings. Words have meanings and they are what they are, and we can explain what we do and how there might be better words to explain what we do. However, we can explain that your perception of that word by definition, although accurate, may be limited in its application to what we're doing. So me personally, I don't get bent out of shape about that, as opposed to taking it as an opportunity to explain what's really happening and what the bigger issue is, and understanding also that if someone's really upset with a conversation, what, peeling back those layers, like you said, we're starting from the same starting point. A lot of times everybody cares about animals and wildlife. So if that's the case, like what's the real issue driving that, as opposed to trying, and again, I'm definitely for putting out fires before they start. I just not sure if that's one that I personally see as being ultra critical, but again, I have the luxury of not having to contend with that on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I find it interesting because I'm in a very public facing place, and sure, I deal with anti-zoo people a lot. And I'm in a really unique place since I am technically independent, and right, also, so like I'm a good voice for that. So I am very careful about it. But I also find it silly.
Yeah,
well, what I mean? But also, I will be to be completely honest with you, I hate word policing in general. I love swearing. I think people who won't say the F word, but will say frickin' and frackin' and flickin' and whatever else they say, to me, it's just the same thing. And the fact that I can watch, Gustavo Fring get half of his face blown off in a meth war on Breaking Bad, but then the person who sees it happen can't go, holy F, without it being a problem, is just the stupidest thing to me.
Right.
So on a personal level, I actually agree with you. But then at the same time, I've had so many conversations where, early on when before I stopped trying to use this word, where I'd be like, oh my gosh, no, animals in captivity, blah. And they're like, captivity, that's the word, it's jail. And I'm like, oh,
right. and I think part of it too is also, I was just having these conversations about other things, but I was remarking to someone, growing up in the city, I remember there used to be Ku Klux Klan parades on the south side of Chicago. There was like two that I remember growing up, and they quickly stopped. And I remember my parents always saying, "Listen, if you just that kind of stuff, if you don't go to the parade and you just ignore it, it goes away." Right now, whether or not that's the best advice or anything like that, I don't know. But they did go away. People stopped going. The newspaper stopped covering. They got no attention, and it faded away. And so I think sometimes too, like putting undue attention on something that someone's all worked up about just draws attention to something that's not that important either. So the question too is if you're that you're not you personally, John, but an individual who is very against using the word captivity to describe zoos, the knee-jerk response is, oh, that's like jail or something, right? And they're very concerned about defending the validity and role of zoos, I think is to my way of thinking is a locked in proposition for society today, is that they're of benefit and value. You might want to expand your understanding of what the word means. It's not that limited and restrictive, and it does not need to be pejorative or have these. There's a lot of connotations to what it is. Do you have pets at home? They're in captivity. And because if my dog tries to leave, I go running after him to bring him back, right? So, yeah, I understand the concerns and issues. I think perhaps, though, if we move away from worrying about a specific word and just educating about the issue, or getting at the heart of the matter more so in dialogue, would be good. Because I think too, like to the point of the folks who are against zoos, again, if we had a broader conversation, an actual debate that would be discussing what do they see as the problems with zoos? Because again, the animals live longer. They're reproducing better. They're healthier. So wherein lies the problem? If it's just objective like that, quality of life is far better. And then you look at all of the conservation outcomes that come out of that, and the connection people form. Millions of people being exposed to red pandas and being able to go see them. That's so again, where's the downside? Because you could go to Nepal and not see a red panda, right? I mean,
yeah.
that was one of the challenges that people were saying on safaris is, I wanted to see XYZ and I didn't. And that generally doesn't happen at a zoo.
Right. No, absolutely. I think yeah, it's really some good, interesting points and that you're making. And I think for me, so much of it is I've only recently reached this conclusion, and I mean, it's kind of this way with everything in life, but I don't know why it took me a while to get there with the zoo stuff. But I've just come to the point that there are anti-zoo people who you will never change. And the dialogue is just not worth having.
Correct.
And so I think what we need to start to do as an industry is focus more on figuring out how to reach the middle. I don't know the actual numbers, but like if you're going to say 50% of people are pro zoo, 50% are anti-zoo, it's actually nowhere near that. But for the sake of this argument, the truth is what's much closer is that it's going to be 20% are like super pro zoo, 20% are super anti zoo, and then in the middle are the 60% that you actually have to reach and stuff. And they're not going to be the ones that yell at you for using one word or something like that.
Right.
I think that zoos in particular need to stop worrying about that 20%. Just accept that they exist. They're going to put mean comments on their social media, block them or ignore them or do whatever the hell you want to do, but focus on the ones who are willing to dialogue. That's what I've been doing. And it's great.
Yeah, there was a great, and I'm going to get it wrong, but I would encourage in your fans to Google it. I believe the name of the documentary was Zoo Revolution, and it features Jenny Gray, Dr. Jenny Gray, and Zoos Victoria in Melbourne, Australia, prominently, but not exclusively. But it's the documentary talks about this zoo anti-zoo debate, right? Like and really lays out a lot of the issues that the zoo folks recognize as being problematic and attempting to solve and face these head on, and then also some really, I think thought-provoking and meaningful criticisms of zoos and what the challenges are there, for us as a society. And some of them also weren't, right? It kind of shows that, again, I think to your point is like some of those arguments you can't really argue with it because it's not it's not a rational, defensible position that allows for debate. It's a very emotion-driven sort of response that locks in and refuses to move. And so I think, that you bring up a good point is like you just sometimes cut your losses. And again, not that you're belligerent or mean, but it's just like I don't know, what do we really need to say to that?
Right.
It's like it's not true, and so we can't unpack it all the way to show how untrue it is. It's a waste of time.
Very cool. We are at an hour already, which is insane.
That is nuts. Holy smokes.
We didn't even talk about like what you do at ECU or anything, which is hilarious. But I think we'll just have to do a second episode at some point because this has been an absolute joy.
I can't imagine there's going to be a fan outcry for a sequel, but I'd be happy to do it.
This is the kind of stuff that my fans eat up. Actually, you have no idea. This one, I already know it's going to be popular. Whenever we go off the rails and philosophical, people are like, "Oh my god, that was the best thing ever." So,
well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the fun stuff to talk about. I mean, especially with folks that are on board, right? And if we're all coming from the same place of trying to make zoos better, it's like, okay, well, let's really take the gloves off and how much full contact fighting can we like what's a real sticky issue of what do we do? We can talk. Oh, here's one that you want to like pull apart all the time. Should visitors be able to touch or have contact with the animals?
I find that topic to be very fascinating, and I'll take it
like
to
a
this
mic drop one, right?
No, seriously, right?
Ask it and walk away.
And I'll take it to even a deeper level because I get to, and I know what impact it has on me.
Mm-hmm.
But you also can't have 10,000 people doing that. But oh my god, oh no, I know. And also, like another thing I love to think about is the whole like no selfies with certain species and stuff like that debate that's going on right now. It's like, okay, cool. So do we know that it actually some of the studies that I've read are only based on social media reactions to things, like people saying they want one. And I will tell you, when I played drums with an elephant, a whole bunch of people started commenting that they want an elephant in their band, and they don't, or maybe they do, but they're not going to try and get one.
Right.
And so it was very like kind of eye-opening to me in terms of like, how much does something like that help, especially if you know that the algorithm will show more people your post if your stupid face is in it. Right. Versus like how much awareness are you raising and conservation action can you create versus how much of an uptick in the pet trade will there be, and then what's the trade-off, and like I find it fascinating.
Yeah. And things too, like kind of like secondary to that. I know like the Sunset Zoo in Manhattan, Kansas has a great program where animals paint. In particular, some of the elephants and other. I can't remember all of them now. I want to say one of the Skibins does it too, but they sell the artwork in the gift shop, right? And that's just fantastic to think about that. And they have videos of the keepers helping, working with the animals, letting them paint. But what a connection, right? Like, oh, that's a really cool painting. What is that? Oh, that's actually done by an elephant at the zoo. That, what a conversation starter and what a way to interact and have that sort of thing. So I think there's some really interesting ways and connections and I think it's a topic that shouldn't be off limits in discussion. I think there's definitely some caveats, but it would be intriguing to see how that could be pulled off in a meaningful way.
Yeah, definitely. We already have half of our next episode planned out. This was fun.
I've got another master's project for you.
So speaking of which, I have about 35 pieces of animal art so far and more coming in all the time. I actually just won one at the Tree Kangaroo workshop that you had to miss, sadly.
There we go.
It's time now, don't you know? We've come to the end of the show. But there's one tale left to go. You're gonna laugh and say, oh no. It's time for the Rossifari poop story. I've been racking my brain, and I guess on the upside, I don't have a personal gross story, but I guess I can give more of an interpretive one, which might be more relevant. So one of the big pushes at Zoos Victoria is for recycled toilet paper, because they're using a lot of virgin timber to create toilet paper in Australia, and it impacts the wombat habitat. And so wombats have become a kind of a icon for recycled toilet paper. And one of the reasons why is because wombats have square poop, so it doesn't roll and get in their dens and stays where it gets dropped. And so, so I guess I can hope that your visitors can encounter some square poop one day in their encounters with wombats. That's awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to do this.
You bet. It's been my pleasure.
All right, y'all, I need you to reach out and tell me what you thought about what Jeffrey said, if it influenced what you're thinking about with any of the topics we brought up. Are you excited to have him back for another episode? Because I want to, but obviously I want to do what y'all want to do, so let me know. I have the feeling a lot of y'all really loved that one, though, and I know that I did. So, yeah, that's really, what else can I even say at that point other than that, right? There was so much stuff there that I'm still thinking and going through everything, having just edited this episode, and I already lived it once when I was having the conversation. So before I go, I do want to take a moment to say thank you to all of my patrons, especially my Red Panda level patrons: Dr. Laura Shank, Dr. Stephen Williamson, Barbara Bennett, Jenny Owens, Melissa Reed, Carrie Kirkpatrick, John Lewis, who is also here for stickers, Kevin Williams, and Cormac McMuffin. Meow. And I want to remind you all that we'll be back here on Friday with the brand new episode of Rossifari Zoo News. But until then, remember, friends, the word credits backwards is Steiderk. The Rossifari podcast is produced, hosted, and engineered by John Rossi. Editing and fact-checking by John and Dr. Zoe Rossi. Our theme song is Sevens by Nathan Burke, performed by Nathan and John. Interrupting John theme and additional voices by Taylor Isaac Gray. You can reach John directly on Instagram and Facebook at Rossifari, or by email at rossifaripod@gmail.com. Rossifari is part of the Daydreamer Media Network. Now, stop listening to me and go visit a zoo.